This is UNBOUND, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. And today, a special podcast with Professor Stephen Quake, Head of Science at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. The podcast is hosted by Professor Dan Pe'er, Vice President for Research and Development.
Hello, everyone. I have today with me Professor Steve Quake, who is the head of the science at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, where he oversees CZI's science grant program, technology development, and the CZ Biohub Network. And his contribution to science are varied and include invention of biological equivalent of the integrated circuit development of whole organism cell atlas and creation of diagnostics that have made medicine safer by replacing invasive biopsies such as you can help me with this. Amniocentesis, right, with simple blood test. Apologize. It's been a hard day and it's heating here. It's very hot. Okay, Steve received numerous awards for his discoveries and he's been elected to distinguished academies, including, and only few people are actually members of the three national academies. So he's the member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Medicine, and the National Academy of Inventors. And he has published more than 300 papers, which have been cumulatively cited more than 100,000 times. Amazing. Steve is also holding a faculty position at Stanford University. He's a professor of bioengineering and applied physics, and previously he was the founding co-president of the Chan Zuckerberg Biohub between 2016 to 2022. A Howard Hughes investigator of Medical Institute from 2006 to 2016, and a professor at Caltech, California Institute of Technology, from 1996 and 2005. So thank you for being here with us today. And I want to chat with you about, some ideas that we might have predominantly on the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, but also let's start about your experience as a researcher, as an entrepreneur, and maybe tell us a little bit about your background and your role in CZI, so we'll know a little bit better.
Sure. Well, I got my start in physics.
Nobody's perfect.
Right? Correct. You learn that humility in physics. Maybe Feynman and Dirac were perfect, but after that, it falls off pretty fast. And I was interested in the interface between physics and biology and have explored that with the idea through my career of trying to bring the ideas of precision measurement from physics into biology. And I've been fortunate enough to have sort of three careers in science there. The first around single molecule biophysics, second around microfluidics, and the third around genomics. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a great ride. And now I have the opportunity to try to help science at a global scale by helping Mark and Priscilla with their science philanthropy, which I'm super excited about. I'm about a year into the job of overseeing all their science philanthropy. And as you mentioned, I got my start with them back in 2016 as the founding co-president of their first research institute, which was in San Francisco.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your unique mission and strategy in terms of approaching those grand challenges in science.
Yeah. So Mark and Priscilla have decided to give their entire fortune away during their lifetime. And their goal is to achieve a lot through their and their children's lifetime. So it's sort of a 100-year mission. And in science, it's to cure, manage, or treat all human disease over the course of a century. Not that we're going to do it ourselves, but to try to stimulate the global research community to do it. Our decision has been over the next couple of decades to focus on basic science, because we think that's where transformative discoveries are going to come that'll really change the way medicine is practiced and have huge impact. So I get the privilege of trying to lead that. We have three broad ways we're approaching this strategically. We call it Build, Fund, Do. Fund is grant giving, and we are a global grant giving organization. We've given grants in something like 30 different countries. We've given, I think, something like 9 of them in Israel, actually, across 5 institutions, nine PIs across 5 institutions here. We fund across a total of something like 30 odd countries. And we do that in 5 broad areas, including cell biology, neuroscience, imaging, science and society, which is a combination of rare disease and genome science, and open science. We've been a big advocate of trying to accelerate science through the use of preprints and open science, and we're the major supporter of bioRxiv. So that's the fun part. The do part is doing science, which we do through the institutes that we've established. And Biohub was the first one, Biohub San Francisco. We're now establishing a network of Biohubs. We just launched the second one in March. That's in Chicago. And with the Biohubs, the idea is to partner with great universities. In San Francisco, we did it with Stanford, UCSF, and Berkeley to take on a big decade-long problem that they wouldn't do on their own, kind of be a nexus for driving that collaboration. And in Chicago, we're doing with the University of Chicago, Northwestern, and University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
Can I suggest you an idea?
Please, go right ahead.
Biohub in Israel. Right, so you have, nice universities. Tel Aviv University is a good example. The Weizmann Institute, which is very close by. Hebrew University, Technion. We have a few others. But these are major universities. I mean, again, we're small scale compared to other in the world. But for example, Tel Aviv University is the largest university in Israel. So we have about 30,000 students. Among them, half are graduate students and postdocs. So this is a critical mass.
Absolutely. And, I was trying to figure out when the plane was coming in today how many times I've been to Israel, and I've lost track. It's been so many. And I love to come here to talk science because the scientific community is so strong and everyone is so impassioned and intense about the things they're doing and thinking very deeply about science. And it's always rewarding when I come here. And so, yes, I find this a super interesting place. Before we do an institute, we'll do more grants. And before we do an institute internationally, we've got to figure out what we're doing in the U.S. It's a big step for us right now, moving from being a regional organization to a national organization in the United States. And that's requiring us to do some growing. And a few years after that, we get that worked out, then we'll think about what it means to do an institute internationally.
Good. So I want to take you back a little bit. I mean, it's not in my scheduled text, but, just from curiosity. So you started as a physicist. How come a physicist is interested in fundamental biological processes?
Well, it was a journey.
I'm sure it was.
It was a journey. When I was a first-year student in graduate school, I spent most of that first year in the library reading the physics literature very broadly. And I decided I was going to do kind of a de novo search over what I should focus on for my PhD across all of physics. And I decided the thing that excited me most was the interface of physics with biology. It felt to me a little like physics was kind of a mature field, and I loved physics, I love the structure of it, the mathematical part of it, the ability to predict, all that, the intricacy, the problem solving. But I felt biology was a field where it was expanding in all directions at once. The knowledge was coming so fast, and, trying to get the best of both of those fields is where I wanted to make my career. And I started out working on very physical problems in biology. What are the forces and dynamics on polymers like DNA? And can we measure those? And thinking about DNA as a polymer and not as the repository of genetic information. And then over time, got interested in more fundamental biological problems. And so became more deeply enmeshed in what it means to think about how life works.
So that was a very nice answer because I started as a mathematician with biology, which was something that nobody understood here, to be a mathematician in biology. I was so bad in math that I knew that I cannot continue. And when I graduated, I focused on biochemistry and then on membrane biophysics. So a little bit of more, quantitative biology, I would say. but I was overwhelmed with excellent mathematicians that my fellow students were, among them Aviv Regev.
I know very well.
Yeah.
Yep.
So for example, it's very hard to work with, somebody like Aviv as an undergraduate studying together. She's excelling, so it was kind of depressing. And we had another guy who received, when he was 29 years old, Fields Medal. So, it's very hard to work with those people. So everyone changed the field according to what they wanted. Okay, I'm coming back to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. So I wanted to know, or I'm happy that you'll tell us or share with us a little bit about how do you hope to achieve the focus area goals that you just mentioned? What is the strategy behind this? Can you share with us a little bit? And one other question is, when are people submitting grants? What is the average grant? Is there any limitation? What are the general rules in terms of, how many years, how many people involved, if there is any advantages for international collaboration or just your own lab? Any info will be much appreciated.
Of course. Well, I mean, to your first question, the simple answer is trying to find great scientists and give them the resources to advance the field. That's our strategy. And one way we go about it is by partnering directly with universities that have very deep benches of scientists. That's the Biohub Network, where you can take on a sustained effort on a 10-year problem. Another way to do it is to find excellent individuals wherever they are around the world and fund them directly with grants. And, so to your question about grants, our typical grants are 2 to 3 years in length, range from $100,000 to $1 million, in that kind of range. Some of them are designed to be collaborative, some are single PIs. We have a variety of structures around that. One that we like a lot, and I'm trying to use a little more broadly in their organization, is collaborative pairs. That was started by one of our program officers, Katja Bros, in the neurodegeneration area, where she would pair a junior person with a senior person and have one be a technology person, one be a biology person, and fund the collaboration between them. And that's been very successful. So we're starting to use that in other programs now. But also, I think just finding great individual investigators and funding them and bringing them together as a community is important to us.
So do you have, let's say, a joint symposium or all funded people?
We do. We have a number of symposia every year. People within a given program come together to share their results. The program officers are working very diligently to get people to be sharing their discoveries and help them sort of mutually reinforce and advance each other's research.
So how does, or I would say why, does international collaboration, for example, between researchers is so important?
Because nobody's got all the answers themselves.
Yes.
Science goes faster when you share knowledge. That's why we're interested in preprints. Typical publication delay is 12 to 18 months, and that's a period of time where the rest of the world doesn't know your discovery. And if you think that one new discovery depends on the previous, that injects a delay, and the compounding of that delay is enormous. And so anything you can do to reduce that will help advance science, which is why we support bioRxiv, but also why we bring our grantees together to share their results well ahead of the time they're ready to be published or even be preprints, so you can get that kind of feedback from your peers.
Okay. Who can receive funding from CZI?
So the vast majority of our grantees are either academics at universities or other nonprofit research institutions. We do occasionally fund companies in strategic areas of interest with grants, and sometimes we invest in startups that are spinning out. But those are smaller parts of the budget. By far, the vast majority is nonprofit research institutions, and we give our grants through a competitive process. So we issue RFAs and call for proposals, and I encourage everyone, please sign up to our mailing list so you can get the RFAs when they come out. They're focused, and each one is focused in a different area, and chances are we'll get one that hits your area at some point. Send in the proposal. It's reviewed by both internally and by subject matter experts from the international community. and then we try to fund the very best of the proposals we get.
And the percentage of funding?
It varies across programs, and I'd say it's not unusual to be, the most competitive ones are kind of 5% pay lines, and others will be 10 to 15%.
And so you mentioned those 5 areas of interest. What about, other types of things? For example, issues that are, for example, antibiotic resistance, okay, which is probably the next problem of our community. Maybe not in 2040, maybe in 2050, but according to the World Health Organization, we are deemed to be part of this antibiotic resistance. For example, this is something that CZI is interested in.
Yeah, we're interested in infectious disease. And in the San Francisco Biohub, one of the major themes there is around using metagenomic techniques to monitor disease outbreaks, both viral and bacterial, including antibiotic resistance. So it's on the diagnostic side. They have a tool they've partnered with a couple dozen labs around the world. On the side of developing drugs, new antibiotics, that's not something we've been very active in. We've had discussions about it. It's such a complicated problem because it's not just a scientific and technical problem. It's also a clinical problem, a kind of health economic problem, and there's issues that go well beyond the science that are going to be required to solve
So
that.
yesterday I read from the WHO website, I'm less familiar with this topic, but that 50 million people a year die from probably from sepsis, but they think it's antibiotic resistant. You go to the hospital, I'm talking only about people that hospitalized from one disease, for example, many leukemia patients, older people like CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, that goes to the hospital are infected with some kind of resistant antibiotics, mostly through the hospital or the airway, and they will eventually die from sepsis or some.
Yeah, it's very tragic. I mean, there's a number of cancers, particularly the blood cancers.
But it's more than cancer, basically.
Which affect your immune system. Yeah, and you don't die from the cancer,
you don't
die from the infection.
Exactly.
And it's like I'm picking a number out, but it's like order half. I mean, it's a lot of people, those cancers, it's not the cancer that kills them, but it's infection from being immunocompromised. And it's not just bacterial infection, it's also fungal and sometimes viral.
So another question in mind. So how do the original founders, Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan's vision, basically work as co-CEO and co-founders? Do they really have a role, and they play a role in the policy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, as I think everyone knows, Mark Zuckerberg is one of the great technologists of our time. Priscilla Chan is a pediatrician. She's a physician. And so combining their two interests is exactly what CZI does, technology-inspired research that's going to affect human health over time. And they're co-CEOs of CZI and both very heavily involved. Priscilla runs it on a day-to-day basis. She's my boss. She knows everything that's going on. We're talking multiple times a week. And with Mark, he's got a day job that keeps him pretty busy, but he really knows what's going on, and we're acting with him pretty often as well.
So basically they are involved.
Oh, absolutely.
And about policy, who determines, what will be the next wave in science that you're going to fund?
Yeah, I mean, we work it out internally. We do a lot of consultation with the scientific community. And then we make some decisions together. That's basically my job. I propose them, but they have to be approved by Mark and Priscilla. I would say, as an example of that, when we wanted to do the next biohub, the one that's in Chicago in the end, we decided to do it through open competition. So Mark and Priscilla had decided they wanted the theme of the next decade to be measuring human biology. We said, okay, tell us what that is. Issued a very general call for proposals. And we said, need to have 3 universities involved that are in the same geographic area. you have to identify something in this broad rubric that's going to be a decade-long, deeply inspiring problem to solve, and come propose it to us. And we got something like 58 proposals from 170 odd different universities. It was really an enormous amount of energy, effort went into it, and they had great ideas. And so from that, we filtered through what we got to Chicago, which is about instrumenting human tissue and measuring the proteins and metabolites that are involved with inflammation, which is involved in something like 50% of all deaths. It's astounding. But many other good ideas. And, we received a lot of great feedback that people said, even though we didn't get the BioHub, just the act of having planned it forced us to work together in ways that we should have worked together a long time ago. And we're now going to pursue some of the ideas that we came up with through this process through other philanthropies. And thank you for getting us to talk to each other.
Unbelievable. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, I think, one last question, which is a personal question. How do you manage your academic work in your lab at Stanford with managing a huge infrastructure that is probably, I'm sure it's intriguing, but you need to oversee the science of different topics from different places in the world? How do you manage this? And you're also an entrepreneur, that I didn't mention.
Yeah, the first 60 hours of my week go to CZI, and anything left over goes to research.
Okay, that was an honest answer.
And, my group is much smaller than it was when I was just an academic scientist. So I've definitely downsized the group, and we're working on selected things. I'm just really enjoying having the opportunity to try to help the entire scientific community. It's a real privilege.
So I'd like to thank you for being with us and answering very honestly all my naive questions. I was Dan Peer, professor at Tel Aviv University, Vice President for Research and Development. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dan, for having me. It's a pleasure.